If you haven't followed the podcast yet and don't know who I am, I'm Chris Wright, the head of the PUBS Advisory Service. I provide insights into the UK pubs trade, I speak with other experts, and I share experiences and stories from publicans across the country. Along the way, we'll explore different pubs, how they're run, and speak with their operators. Podcasts are released weekly, and you can contribute to the podcast using WhatsApp. Just message us on 07766073815. Leave your story in the form of a voice message or voice note. 5 minutes is approximately the maximum time limit. If you get cut off or have a longer story, just message back and continue where you left off. Please include as much detail about your experience as possible and avoid recording in noisy places or a moving vehicle. If you run a pub business, I highly recommend subscribing to the PUBS Advisory Service. It's the most extensive pub service, offering more than just representation. We have online calculators, document banks, and other resources for those interested in or already running a pub business. You can even claim the cost of subscribing back as a business expense. Some of the WhatsApp content will make it to special episodes of our podcast, exclusive only to subscribers of the PUBS Advisory Service. This paid subscription also gives you early and advert-free access to our episodes, plus online sessions where I answer your questions about the industry. Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of our PUBS podcast. I'm Chris Wright from PUBS Advisory Service. Today I'm talking to Paul Crossman. Paul Crossman is a multi-site operator in the wonderful city of York, tucked up in the north of England. Paul was telling me he's been at the Swan for 18 years this year. Have you already passed that anniversary, Paul?
No, it's just coming up actually.
Just coming up, 18 years then. And then 2010, you picked up another pub, the Slip. And then a couple of years after that, the Volunteer, yeah?
That's right, yeah.
So you're taking over York. Are you a Viking by any chance?
But it felt like it. Maybe taking over York about 15 years ago. We've not done much new stuff since then, I'm afraid.
Oh,
So,
no worries. Well, I think it's apt also to point out that you are also the owner and founder of York Gin. So you seem to have ridden the wave there and brought your own branded spirit to the market. And that seems to be going great guns. I've always heard really good reports about it. I'm not a massive gin drinker, but is that business going good for you?
no, it has gone really well actually. Yes, it's COVID was obviously a bit bumpy, but we're still here, and yeah, the is very good, very popular. Yeah, so it's interesting being a supplier as well as a publican. Actually, is a good situation to get both sides.
Well, I love the way you said it was a bit bumpy, COVID. I think that's the understatement. But maybe we'll come to that. But there's a couple of things, Paul, I want to talk to you in this podcast. I mean, we're going to break it into two chunks. And chunk one is I want to talk about you, your background, how you took these pubs, especially the Swan, from where it was to where it is now, and how you managed to do that, and what was important in that journey. Because I think it's a really interesting insight. You've driven a wonderful community offer. I've been to the pub. I really enjoyed it. If I was closer, I'd definitely be in there drinking a hell of a lot more. So that's a great offer, and I think it's good to discuss that and talk about how you were tied and then obviously free of tie. And then in the second part, we're going to talk about your role as the chair of the Campaign for Pubs and how the Campaign for Pubs is situated today. And in fact, that nicely dovetailed into how you and me met, because
Yeah.
we met campaigning before the Pubs Code came about in England and Wales. So I can't remember the year. I'm going to say 2010, maybe. Does that feel about right? Had you?
It probably was about that early, really. I mean, yeah, because I got into campaigning um, with the Swan at the time being a Punch Taverns pub.
Yeah.
And with like most Punch Taverns tenants, you quite quickly encounter a certain sort of a degree of difficulty with the company. And yeah, it was through someone, I think we got together through Chris Lindsay, who set up the Punch Tenants Network.
He did.
He did, and I read an article. It was shared online. I think it was in the Telegraph actually, and it mentioned Chris, and I was like, "Oh, there's a Punch Tenants group." So I got in touch with him, and that kind of led to everything else that we've done campaigning wise, including meeting you and all the other Fair Pint guys and everything.
Good. I mean, you absolutely burn up the rail fare, as I recall, coming up from York to London or down from York to London. I don't know which way around it is, but you were up and down that railway line quite a few times. I was absolutely amazed at your energy to meet you in the late evenings in London, and you're like, I'm just getting on the train. I'll be off back to York. So
I was a bit younger then, Chris, and I was highly motivated motivated. So yeah,
Highly motivated. Well, that was terrific. And we did have a lot of people from Northeast and Northwest who would come to those events. I mean, I'm planning on having a bit of a campaigning get together on Zoom one evening. So hopefully we'll get together a lot of the old campaigners, Chris Lindsay, etc. So that'll be a fun event. I'll definitely invite you to that. So
that'd be
let's go
great.
back and talk about your pub, the Swan. That's your first foray into having a tenanted pub. And let me ask you this question. Why the Swan? Did you live next door? You got drunk in there? Why this pub?
Well, yeah, I mean, it wasn't my first foray into. It was actually my first time behind the bar. Actually, it was. I'd never even done a bar job or anything, so it was a kind of a stab in the dark, really, for me. My previous career was I was a photographer, and I was in London, and my wife and I spent 10 years in London, and she's a Yorkshire girl, and we came back to Yorkshire to be near her family, really. Settled in York, and like most people, when you move city, you want to be near a good pub. So we just walked into the Swan on one of our recce's and fell in love with it as a pub. So we thought we'll move near there, and that was purely as a punter.
Mhm.
Spent 5 years just being a customer at the Swan, but we moved to this part of York very much because of that pub.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, that's
So
strong. Tell me about
no,
the design of the pub. There's something very unique about it, that you don't see very often. If anyone wants to go and have a look online, what is the style of your pub? What's it called?
yeah, it's grade two listed because it's an unusual one for York. It's got what's called a West Riding layout. It was designed by Tetleys. It was all done between the wars, 1936, and it's got a
Mm.
beautifully preserved interior with lots of lovely woodwork around the bar, and it's got a drinking corridor and then two rooms off either side of the bar. So the bar's sort of central, serving all three spaces. It's only quite a small pub. It's got a decent beer garden as well, but it's not a massive pub, but it works brilliantly. It works great as a customer, but also really to run it. It's a great machine really for serving customers beer as quickly as possible. It's a great pub.
Yeah, I remember drinking in there one evening, and you say drinking corridor. I love that. It's a great description because, quite frankly, we need more drinking corridors
Yeah, it
wherever they
works.
occur. It really does work, and it was quite. It's nothing I've experienced since because I don't know any other pubs with that layout. But yeah, it got the crack going. It was a really good buzzy, clicky thing going on. I loved it.
Absolutely. It's
Yeah.
a really sociable design. It really works really well. And it was yeah, you'll see more of these kind of pubs over in Halifax and sort of that area really. But it was quite a Tetley model at the time. There's a great pub in Halifax apparently called the Three Pigeons,
Right.
which is similar, but their drinking corridor, such as, is actually a hexagonal space in the middle of the pub. And there's rooms off each angle of the hexagon and the bar's on one side.
Oh,
And apparently that
fantastic.
works amazingly well as well. So Tetley's had their head screwed on. They knew how to design pubs.
And they certainly did a cracker then. You've kept it well in good nick. I mean, the time I visited a few years ago now, but it was beautifully turned out and, fantastic drink offer. So you take on this pub. Did you assign it? I can't recall, or did you just get
Yeah.
a menu? Yeah. So you
Yeah, we
assigned.
were good friends with the people that had it before, actually. So we took an assignment off a friend, actually, and they'd done a great job. They basically turned it around. It used to be, well, back in the day, I think most pubs go through a dodgy phase. It was actually the BNP pub for York at one point, apparently. So it was a bit of a no-go pub. But anyway, our predecessors turned it into a more of a cask offering, which was great. So we've just built really. We loved it the way it was, and we assigned it so that we could keep the pub the way it was, really,
Mm.
because everyone was very worried at the time when they went that it would change. So yeah, we took it on with the motivation of keeping it the same, but we've just basically built on what it was doing before. So we've increased the cask range, and crucially, when the pubs code came in, we took advantage of the opportunity to go free of tie. So we're now totally not tied at all, even though it's still a leasehold pub.
Yeah, and your ownership model has obviously moved from Punch's ownership to Heineken. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there was that buyout. I forget the year, 2018,
It was,
19,
well, for us, it was 2017, which was a horrendous
2017.
year for me. I lost my business partner, unfortunately passed away, and my mother passed away. And then we had the assignment on top of all that. And it was the single most stressful year of my life. And that includes COVID, to be honest, actually. It was the worst year of my life. But yeah, we managed to get the assignment through. Sorry, not the assignment, sorry, the renewal through, because that was our trigger point for taking MRO.
Yes.
We didn't actually get MRO because Punch fought us tooth and nail to try and stop us getting free of tie. And then when we achieved it, the next working day actually was when the pub flipped over into Heineken's estate. So we've been kind of shunted from one pub co to another.
So let's talk about that difference between operating under a tied regime to the free of tie regime. Just give me your standout headline. What were you experiencing during that punch era? and what's changed? Tell me how that works.
Well, yeah, we obviously, but we took the pub in 2007. So 2017 was our 10-year renewal. And I can honestly say I would not have renewed it if we couldn't have got a free of tie deal. Um, it was getting progressively harder through those first 10 years to actually um, turn a profit, really, with the pricing that we were facing from Punch. And I knew at that point, how much we were getting ripped off, basically, because I had two free of tie pubs, and it was getting to the point routinely at the Swan we were paying 90 to 100% more for the beer than we were in our free of tie pubs. So I
Mm.
was in a totally sort of transparent situation. Um, and it was imperative that we went free of tie because we were trying to get by on a GP of about 43%, which anybody in the
Wow.
trade will tell you is not really enough. Even in those days, costs have gone up since then, but even in those days, it wasn't enough. Um, and we had a battle with that, with Punch not really believing that that was our GP because they were trying to make out we could get more cask yield than we actually could, which I know is a whole different subject that you might
Oh, they
probably,
will be covering the 72 pint saga at some point. Don't you worry. We'll
yeah.
need a day to
So,
go.
so we had these kind of ongoing discussions with Punch about the fact that their pricing and to be honest, their limited product range was a massive problem for us.
Mm.
So free of tie for us was the only option really, and I had to fight really hard to get it because um, I know I listened to your previous conversation with Stuart Cakebread about the Section 30 L&T stuff.
Podcast
Well,
number 3. Yep.
yep, absolutely. So as soon as Punch, because I'd campaigned alongside you and the other guys to get the pubs code through, they knew full well that I was going to go for MRO.
Mm.
So they served a Section 25 notice on us, literally 12 months to the day. The first opportunity they had, they sent someone to the pub, served it on my cleaner. At that point, our Section 26 notice was going through by email, but they got theirs in first, which was really gutting, actually. And we got into a battle because they would obviously, for anyone that doesn't know who's listening, a Section 25 notice is basically an eviction notice at the end of your lease. They don't want to renew your lease. And they gave the typical grounds of they want to take the pub back into their own management,
Mm.
which was highly dubious. It was really early days, but like all the pub companies, they were coming up with this kind of model of it's neither managed nor leased really.
Mm.
It's this kind of halfway house model, and at the time theirs was called Falcon, and they were on about taking the pub back to put it into a Falcon agreement, which meant there'd be effectively a new tenant in there, a self-employed tenant, but running a business that was kind of controlled from Punch headquarters.
Mm.
And I think it was all very dubious as to whether that really met the criteria for taking the pub back into their own management. So that's what we challenged them on. We got into that argument and said, well, I don't think that's your own management. And we're prepared to, go and fight this out in court if necessary.
Yeah.
And then lo and behold, we had a meeting and they sent up some proper heavyweights. Head of legal was there, and there were three people from head office that came up to meet me, and I wouldn't meet them in the pub. If any tenants are listening, by the way, you don't have to meet these people in your pub. It's a very,
Neutral
very
ground. Yeah.
emotional setting, obviously,
Yeah, sure.
and they will use that emotional setting, and you will probably become quite upset having that conversation in your own pub. So we had it in my solicitor's office in Sheffield, actually, and they wanted to meet at the pub, but I said no, we'll meet in Sheffield. Had a conversation, and then lo and behold, we got offers through. They clearly didn't want to go to court at that point because it was so early and untested.
Mm.
And we got a few options through, one of which was to go free of tie. But we didn't get the independent rent assessment. We had to basically then thrash out a rent in like a back room,
Without following the
horse
code.
trade.
Yeah. So as the pub,
Exactly.
for those that don't understand, the MRO opportunity has a prescribed methodology written down as to how you get the rent independently assessed, which if you don't go down that route, you're forced, as you say, to use the sort of the other process, the time-honored process, one might call it. Just interested here in the relationship issue. So Punch are not delivering a benefit to you over this 10 years. You're finding your gross profit is being eroded, you're becoming less profitable. Was there anything they did for you that was a benefit in that 10 years? I mean, they fight you at the end, which costs you money, right? So let's tick that one off. But what about during those 10 years? Was there any tangible benefit you felt from that relationship?
They didn't invest a single penny in the pub in the whole 10 years that I was there. they didn't invest any money at all. Um, and it became, yeah, obviously the argument that these pub companies use to government, to justify the fact that they can operate the tie, is that they do provide what they call countervailing benefits to a tenant.
Mm.
One of which, in theory, for example, is a lower rent than you would otherwise pay. Um, and that clearly wasn't the case. And yeah, we had this conversation quite openly. I was quite openly rebellious with them, I must admit. And like a lot of tenants,
You were fearless, fearless, Paul.
well, initially, like most tenants, I was quite nervous about actually going up against them, and particularly in public. Tenants review that as sticking your head above the parapet, really,
Sure.
and you think you might get your head blown off if you do that. But I started speaking out more and more, really, initially on tenants forums and then on the Morning Advertiser page. And, when they had a forum on there, which was great, by the way. And then nothing sort of really happened. So I just got more and more outspoken. And I'd basically say this stuff to their face in meetings. And I'd say, look, you are completely ripping us off. And I'd tell them about the price differential between my pub and my free of tie pub and say, well, you say to government, you're charging lower rents and you're giving discounts on the beer. And it's just completely untrue. This is demonstrably untrue.
Mm.
And there was some. I went through a succession of BDMs, business development managers.
Yeah, you're
some of
rep.
whom were, yeah, some of whom were better than others. Some fancied themselves as like, oh well, I'm not like the rest. I'll do this for you and that for you. Nothing ever turned up because their hands were totally tied by head office.
Mm.
And it just became a sort of farcical relationship. Really, they'd come in and they'd say their bit, and none of it was helpful. Um, and yeah, you just felt like you were kind of had Big Brother watching you the whole time. And the other thing, of course, like a lot of tied tenants, we had the spy in the cellar, which was brew lines. So we had this
Yeah,
beer monitoring.
Vianet, as it's called now. Yes.
Yeah, Vianet, yeah, exactly. It's the beer
Mm.
monitoring equipment that they put onto your lines
Yeah.
to monitor how much beer you're selling, and they'll check that in head office against their sales to you. And they're trying to catch you out for what they call buying out, basically. And if they do catch you out, they'll try and fine you for it. And one day, this is one like the sort of thing that would happen. One day,
Mm.
the head of brew lines, the pub was closed at the time.
Mm.
This guy just turned up. He was stood in front of the bar, and I was in the pub, and we were closed. And he'd come in through the back gate, and he was there with a clipboard looking at all our lines. And he said,
Wow.
"Well, I'm here because you've clearly been buying out." And I said, "What gives you that impression?" He said, well, you haven't bought any cider from us at all. I said, well, we're not tied on cider. And somebody at head office had basically unchecked the box that had triggered this guy to just basically walk into our closed pub. No
Yeah.
invitation, no prior arrangement. And he was there and he was trying to set out, how much they should be fining us. And
Wow.
I immediately got onto my BDM, very, very, very angry, as you can imagine. And
Mm.
they did actually concede that was their mistake. But these sorts of things happen far too frequently. They just treat you like you're kind of just like a indentured labor. It's that kind of relationship,
Mm. So
and
we're
you
far,
feel
far removed from what they advertise. The relationship there was unsupportive. It didn't have any benefit to you. And in fact, what's coming across strongly from you, Paul, is more of a hindrance that actually what they were doing was either upsetting the apple cart quite frequently or costing you money.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I often said that during that period of being tied. We made a success of the pub in spite of our pub company. It was
Mm.
completely in spite of them. There's no credit due to them at all. We have what's called a fully maintaining lease. So we have all the responsibilities of a freehold owner of the property because basically anything goes wrong, you have to fix it. And that includes if the roof falls in or something like
And you've
that.
got a
You know,
grade two listed building. So,
exactly.
you've got
Exactly. Yeah,
that. There
that's
we
right.
go.
And you weren't going to get any support from them, for anything that they weren't contractually obliged to provide. So the lease was the absolute Bible. You had to check your lease and make sure that you were getting everything you were entitled to, whatever that might be. Because I never really kind of worked out what you were entitled to, but the responsibilities were all laid out in the lease, and it was very
Mm.
clear that this was all down to you, basically. So yeah, it was an extremely onerous situation, especially in a grade two listed building, as you say.
Mm.
So that's why you said it was beautifully maintained. I couldn't afford to not let it be beautifully maintained, apart from anything else. I love it anyway, and obviously I would look after it. But yeah, you have to maintain it because
Yeah. You get into
other,
trouble elsewhere. Yeah.
well, yeah, otherwise you're storing up trouble for the end of your lease. They're going to come up to you after you for a massive dilapidations bill.
Yes, and put that right. So we get this impression, very strongly coming across that
punch have just got in the way. So you get right to the end of your lease, and then to your utter dismay, they basically say, "Hey, guy, we want your pub back. We want it back for managed." But at the same time, they're going out of business. The company is financially collapsing, and they're actually for sale under the table. So what? And somewhat, and Heineken buy them.
Yes.
So they're falling over. They're not going forward. They don't have any aspirations really to do any management. So they put up this front to you, and you're using the pubs code, and you're one of the early adopters because the pubs code comes in 2016. So you're triggering your MRO right pretty much within the first 12 months. Is that right?
Yes, it
Pubs
was.
code? Yeah. So you're kind of a new person going forward. Of the pubs
Well,
code.
don't forget, Chris,
Yeah.
I never got a chance to correct. I didn't get a chance to trigger it because they section
True.
25 me before the actual legislation came in.
Yeah.
No, it came into effect in June, didn't it? I think that summer.
That's right. Yes.
So,
Yes.
yeah, and so within a couple of months, we'd been taken out of the scope of the code by the Section 25 notice.
No, that's right to correct me on that. I'm remembering now. So, you're in this situation where you'd like to use those rights. You're kind of being denied the opportunity to use those rights. Did you
Yes.
ever meet with the pubs code adjudicator then, Mr. Newby? Did he ever come and talk to you? Did you ever reach out to him and try and sort things out?
Yes, we had a few meetings actually. Yes, and at that point it was Paul Newby. Yeah, so my MP actually, who's been great, very supportive, MP Rachel Maskell, arranged a meeting for local licensees to get together, and he invited Paul Newby down to. I think he thought it was going to be like I'll tell them all about pubs code thing, but they were quite a savvy bunch of tenants that came along,
Mm.
and I think this was the following January during my it might have been January 2018, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, I raised the issue with him about Section 25 notices, and I said, look, clearly the pubs companies here can use the Landlords and Tenants Act to circumvent their responsibilities under the pubs code, which obviously came under the Employment Act of 2015, I think it
Small
was.
business enterprise and employment. Yes,
That's
correct.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So they could use one bit of legislation to completely circumvent another bit of legislation,
Which
and I said,
what was intended, right?
exactly, and
Yeah.
that's got to be gaming the pubs code, which is meant to be prohibited.
Mm.
And he said in this meeting, he said, "Oh yes, we're aware of these kinds of things, and we are very concerned about them." And
Well,
and then
thanks.
nothing
No,
happened at all, and to the point that he obviously then relinquished the post, and
disappeared.
Fiona Dickey came in, and we've said the same things to her, and she makes the same concerned noises, but then plays down the fact that she doesn't think this is happening very widely anyway, because the pub codes say it isn't happening very much, you know. And of course, yeah, I would say, well, you're not getting honest data, but she believes she is, and it's like,
They seem to play a very good role in putting out feelers, but the feelers that they put out, they obviously get evidence from operators like yourself, and as you mentioned, other tenants, and then they do nothing with that evidence. It just
yes, absolutely.
disappears into the ether. So,
Well, I'll tell you on
yeah.
that subject, actually, one thing that I think the pubs code adjudicator has never known or been able to assess is how often the mere threat of a Section 25 notice is enough to get the pub company what they want. They haven't even got to issue one. They do this. They'll say to tenants, "You do realise we're not going to renew your lease, don't you?" And that's enough to get the tenant to comply. But none of that's recorded in stats that go to the PCA.
Mm,
So there's a whole thing here happening in the background, and it's very clearly happening. But there's a massive amount of denial at the policymaking end of things that there's a problem.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah. Anyway,
Well,
um,
I can feel your pain. I mean, having talked to you in the past about this issue, and to kind of recognize that you have a situation where you supposedly have a regulated company, and if there's any problems, you have a regulator, but the regulated company is not concerned about the regulation, seemingly just blasts on through, and the regulator themselves just largely has ignored you and just brushed you aside. That isn't a great playing field. I mean, do you feel that the regulator has somehow been captured? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you've met with the regulators, I think Fiona and Paul, Fiona Dickey's the current one. What do you think's happened there? Can what's
I Yeah, given our experience with Paul Newby, who was the first one, and for anyone that doesn't know, Paul Newby was basically a Pubco estate agent, a very senior estate agent. Um, a director at Florets, which is the biggest pubco estate agency. They handle pub sales, but also rent reviews and lease renewals and all that kind of thing. And they derive a huge amount of income from the pub companies.
Yeah.
And Paul Newby actually had an outstanding director's loan with Florets for the
I
entire time
remember.
that he was.
So you're raising a conflict of issue.
Well, it was a conflict, and the business the Business and Trade Select Committee flagged it up, and they said this needs to be remedied. This there's no confidence in tenants in this adjudicator because of his background, and they said quite clearly he should be replaced. And at the time, it was Anna Soubry, I think, was in charge of the whole situation, and she just basically just dismissed the whole idea of replacing him. It was a terrible decision and a bad time. So my impression, well, my impression was that he was conflicted, and I don't see how that can be argued. My impression of Fiona Dickey, I actually wrote to her. I wrote to her personally when she got the job, and said, "Look, we've had a meeting." So that we had a meeting with her at that point, with her and Paul Newby when she was about to take on the role. And there was certain things said like, "Oh, I think we need to stop looking backwards and start looking forwards," and all that kind of stuff. So I wrote her a letter and said, "Look, if you think that's going to wash with tenants who've got like a decade of issues that have never been resolved, you can't just tell them to stop looking at what's happened to them because everything's going to be all right going forwards," which it hasn't been, by the way. So I wrote her this letter anyway, and I said, "Look, you need to be really careful about the influence that's put to bear on you by different parties in this industry. The pubcos and their representative body, the BBPA, the British Beer and Pub Association, are extremely effective in controlling the messaging." And I put all this in the letter, and I said, "Look, you need to be listening to other voices." And I really get the impression that hasn't happened, and she's really been, as you say, captured by the narrative that's being pumped out by the people she's supposed to be regulating. My view, and I said this to her openly, is that you should be a champion for tenants because your role was created by tenant campaigning. It was created because of serious historic problems, that tenants have been suffering abuse under this model for years. And you're there to redress this. You're there to provide redress for tenants. And unfortunately, she's kind of fallen into this typical regulator thing where she thinks there's some kind of middle ground, and
the leveling of the playing field, but you can't. You've got parties of different sizes.
I mean, but there's no middle ground. No tenants were abusing their pub company. Do you know what I mean? It was all the other way around, and it's still going on. And we've had meeting after meeting, and we've raised, for example, these new deals, like I mentioned earlier on, things like the Falcon model that Punch were operating. Well, every pub company now has one of those models because they were given time to develop them by Paul Newby's kind of weak regulation of the industry. And they've just run rings around the pubs code, and they've been given time to do it. And they've also restructured their finances. Most of them have been bought out by some new ownership. 5 out of 6 of them are now owned by foreign private equity, some of them in tax havens, Stonegate, headquartered in the Cayman Islands. All of this has been allowed to happen when really the industry was meant to be under strict regulation. So it's been a total catastrophic failure. And the adjudicator has to carry the can for that, as well as the government, obviously, because they've fallen. And this is my single big bugbear, I think, about policymakers. They have fallen for the industry narrative, and that industry narrative is very carefully constructed by a very sophisticated lobbying outfit in the form of the British Beer and Pub Association, who tell the government, this is the problem and this is what we'd like you to do about it. And then they claim to speak for the whole industry, but they're only speaking really for the property owning side of the industry, i.e. the pub owning companies and the big brewers that have formed their membership, the big multinationals and the regional so-called family kind of regional brewers. But there's no small brewers, that fall into that BBPA membership that I'm aware of. It appears to be about 50 very big companies, and they're a corporate lobbyist and they control the narrative. And we need policymakers to really understand that they are being spun a corporate line here, and that the purpose of that line is entirely to protect the market share and the profit margins of the member companies of the lobbying organization.
Right.
That's what they pay them to do. That's what they pay them to lobby for. That is to protect their situation.
Yeah, to be honest, I think my problems with regulation has been the executive draft it up in Westminster, and then the enforcement is either lacking or non-existent. And I think also there is local interpretation that goes on. So the regulators, both Paul and Fiona, both started with a blank sheet. Well, why? Because actually, on both occasions, the government had said we brought them in because of their vast experience. But I mean, I'm not operating a pub. Was there vast experience on show for you as an actual tenant under the regulation, but supposedly being protected? Do you ever see this vast experience? Did you ever see it happen for you?
No, I mean, Paul Newby had obviously had experience of
Mm,
how the the
trade
surveying
works.
side of the industry works, but
Yeah.
I think you and I, we've found out over the years that actually the surveying side of the industry is hardly independent. It's all covered by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, so RICS. It all sounds very kind of respectable and credible to government, obviously. But if you look at the guidelines that those RICS surveyors are actually working under, they're incredibly elastic, and they generally favour the person that's paying them to do the work. Now, the people with the big money are the pub companies, so that's where they're going to skew their efforts if they want to retain those very wealthy clients.
Mm.
And finding a RICS surveyor, for example, that hasn't had any pubco connections is very, very difficult. You and I know a couple,
Mm.
but most tenants wouldn't be able to find one. They'd have to do quite a lot of research. Um, so, the point I'm making there is that everything, everything is kind of stacked in favor of the status quo and against tenants. And talk about kind of you were saying about uh, sorry, you used the word experience. Sorry,
Yeah,
experience.
yeah, their
Yeah,
experience. That was
it
what it was
depends.
told. Well, that's why we got these people in. Paul, we got him in because of his experience of trade. Fiona, because of her experience of being a judge. Where have you seen it?
Yes. Well, this is what the point I was in a very roundabout way trying to make there was that Paul Newby's experience was working for a pub co-friendly surveyor. So he came in with kind of skewed experience in the first place. Fiona Dickey was a different proposition, and initially I think I wasn't alone in being quite pleased when I heard about her appointment because her background was in law, and we thought, well, actually, somebody with a legal experience might look at this in a more impartial way.
Hmm.
But I'm afraid I think her lack of experience of the industry played against her. So I don't think she has got an independent legal view of this, or maybe she's just taking an extremely dry legal view and not really appreciating the historic problems, despite the fact that she's been told over and over again because she's never experienced those problems.
Yeah, so you've mentioned, I mean, when you say you've met with her, obviously you meet with her now, you're free of tie. So you're meeting her not so much, you are a publican still, obviously, and an operator, but you're meeting her as the head of the campaign for pubs, yeah? So
Yeah.
as the postcode, the post pubs code era begins, you stop being campaigning on that tenant side, you become this campaign for pubs that gets launched a few years back. And so you meet her as a representative of other publicans that have joined that campaign. And we'll talk about that in a minute. And you yourself as an operator. So you're giving evidence to these regulators, in the form of written testimony, other types of evidence. You've handed over considerable amounts of evidence. Has any of it been acted on to your view? Is there any outcome?
To be honest, it feels like, and this sounds like an exaggeration, really, but it feels like all we ever get is lip service uh, and a certain amount of denial, actually. So we raise things that we know are problems, and because maybe that exact thing hasn't landed on her desk in that form, there's just a sort of a denial that actually the scale of the problem is what it is.
Mm.
And we've got a problem really as tenant campaigners, even under the campaign for pubs. It's very difficult to get some of the data that you need to show the problem.
Sure.
One of my things is I really think that a lot of the important data that would actually show the scale of problems is held by the pub companies.
Hmm.
So a really good example, for example, would be to take any given pub and right, you tell us how many tenants have been through that pub in the last 5 years. We don't know that. We'd have to do a lot of research to find that out. But that'll be sat in the records at the pub company's office. You know, I'd almost, I'm at the point now where I'd like to see some of this stuff audited, or, you know, like a forced audit of these companies to just show that how dysfunctional or maybe amazingly functional. Maybe I'm completely wrong, you know, but I think the evidence is there in the records of these pub companies. But how we get hold of that data is very difficult. So we end up in this situation where, well, that's just anecdotal. You know, we've had this from policymakers, politicians, civil servants, and the pubs code adjudicator, is that they just treat us like we are just picking out, cherry picking stories from this, that, and the other.
So you're being dismissed. Your evidence is being dismissed, not
We
heard.
are, and that's always been the case with tenant campaigners. You know, I remember um, accusations from pub companies 10, 12, 15 years ago that these are just basically saying to government, don't listen to these guys. They're just basically the bitter failures, you know,
Yeah,
and
malcontents and controversial and
yeah,
nothing more.
absolutely. Yeah. Just
Yeah.
they're just like they couldn't make it work, you know. And this actually brings me to a point, and this is something that's obviously the last couple of years, you and I have talked about this as well. In the light of the post office scandal, um, and
Horizon.
the drama, the ITV drama, I know a lot of publicans who found watching that drama incredibly triggering. I know some people who can't bring themselves to actually watch it because you hear the phrases coming through well, there you go, through the through the select committee, uh, looking at the post office scandal, and you hear phrases like, you know, oh, we were told that we were the
Mm.
only one with this problem, with this
Same language, yeah.
exactly the same language. And you'd have people turning up from head office and they turn up in their shiny black BMWs and they just walk into your post office and they tell you that you've done something wrong.
You're closed.
You're the only one. Yeah. And
Mm.
this stuff has happened to pubs tenants for 20 years. And I, without any exaggeration, I've seen myself actually in slow motion through various social media sites. I must have seen a couple of hundred publicans gradually, slowly being driven out of business and into ruination. And because I've watched them asking for help and you kind of follow their cases and you get to know more people. If I know that many, there must be thousands of people that have been churned through this pubco system, drained of all the resources they've got, told that they're wrong, that they're not making it work because they're doing something wrong. And it's traumatic.
Well,
It's a
the
traumatic
strange
experience.
thing for me is there is a dichotomy here that, as you say, as a publican and tenant and a campaigner yourself today, you're not being believed, and yet evidence was supplied by thousands of publicans back in 2013 to government, and they were believed. That's why you had a pubs code.
Yeah,
So it's not, it's asking tenants like yourself to pluck the teeth from the dragon again.
it
And
is.
I don't understand that. Yeah.
Well, absolutely. I mean, as if it wasn't hard enough the first time round. And you're right. You know that the consultation they had prior to the pubs code, I believe, had one of the highest response rates for any government consultation.
Possibly a record at the time. I think it was something like 8,000 people responded to that consultation.
Right. So
Yeah, it
that
was
was,
enormous. Yes.
and that was on the back of 4, 5 select committees finding
Um,
fault with the pubco model.
that's right. There've been a whole series of select committees. I had taken part in a couple, and I think you did on occasion. You had come and spoke.
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, well, let's just for the audience that are listening in to this podcast, let's just get your official title here. So you're the chairman of the campaign for pubs. When did the campaign start? Who else is involved? You know, just give us some, fill that in for us, please, Paul.
Well, the campaign really, this was a kind of a slight benefit, really, I suppose, if you can call it that, of the COVID year, the first COVID year. Um, Up until that point, we'd had loads of kind of disparate tenant campaigning groups are kind of fragmented into a lot of different groups,
Mm.
all of which were kind of trying to do the same sort of thing, but coming in at different angles, and it got all very confusing. Luckily, we managed to get our act together a bit, prior to the pubs code in the form of the Fair Deal for Your Local coalition, which
Yes.
brought together some of the campaigning groups and managed to give a sort of coherent single message to government. And Camera got involved in that, which was helpful at the time.
There was all
In the
sorts in
long
there.
run, there were
Yeah.
some issues that came from that, but to have their voice, I think, got it taken more seriously. Um, and like you say, every MP at that point, because we had quite a big tenant campaign, MPs were getting letters from pub their pub co-tenant constituents. And I think there are very few MPs that were under any illusions about the pub company model.
Yeah.
And as you remember, actually, obviously the Tory government, it was the coalition government at the time, but the Conservatives whipped against the MRO element of the pubs code.
Yes.
And luckily, enough of their own MPs defied the whip and rebelled. And it's one of the very few defeats that government suffered, actually, to
Well, if you're
get.
a student of, what should we say, Westminster and following politics, you'll know that that's the only defeat for the coalition government.
And it's astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, against a three-line whip. So
But that speaks volumes, doesn't it? Because I think,
speak volumes.
that's tenants going with first-hand experience, talking to their MPs and convincing them that there is a
Well,
massive.
I think this speaks also of the legislative, the executive, the people in Westminster, supposedly representing, and some doing a brilliant job. I work, as you know, cross-party with a lot of different MPs from different parties, and I found, good and bad in all the political parties. And I've always found pubs was a very strong cross-party issue. It cut right across
Yes.
party lines because, as you say, we're wonderfully, what should we say, embarrassed by the number of pubs in every borough, town, village, constituency in Britain. So no MP can be without some vision of pubs and pub life. So yeah,
Absolutely.
they're not a niche. And so I think that's why it is a very good cross-party issue. But I wanted to make this point on the back of your, sort of damnation of your landlords and how they've held you back and battled you and cost you money, is that I don't expect the pub companies to do anything else, but I think they will work to the limits at which they're then stopped. I don't have any strong hatred or dislike of them. They do what they do because they're allowed to get away with that, whatever that is. And so my dislike and annoyance, and if you like, almost hatred, is of the executive and the failure of enforcement in public life. The failure of a government body or an agency or someone with real power and authority to actually carry out that enforcement. And that's really it. I don't blame the pub companies for being commercial and doing commercial things, savage as they are, brutal, but the executive and the executive who put in place enforcers in the form of regulators have got no excuse.
Are you a publican navigating the choppy waters in the UK pub industry, or perhaps you're looking to get into the trade for the first time? The Pubs Advisory Service is here to help. We provide essential advice and support, from licensing and legal queries to tenancy agreements and business growth strategies. Want to unlock exclusive insights, in-depth guides, and all our past podcast episodes, including hidden extras? Subscribe to Pass today. Membership gives you unparalleled access to expert advice, ensuring your pub thrives. Visit pubs.expert to learn more and subscribe. Don't miss out. Empower your pub business with Pubs Advisory Service.
No, I totally agree.
That is their job. And
Yes.
I think it's wholly incumbent upon them to do that and not to leave it to individuals like yourself, Paul. And I think, you have gone grey, probably lost your eyesight, probably had more sleepless nights than you can count by actually fighting a fight you shouldn't have had to fight. I mean, that's how I feel it. And it grieves me that here we are still somewhat fighting, not so much against pub companies, but fighting against the public sector who should be actually doing this job. And the evidence has been there. If anyone wants to go looking through Hansard's and look at all the government submissions, they're all available online. You can read it. You don't have to believe us. You can just go and read the evidence. It's there. I have no time for people that kind of go, oh yeah, but where's the proof? We've done it. Did it a decade ago. So here we are a decade on.
I agree.
The campaign for pubs comes about because, as you say, there's a COVID year and you're online and you decide that the alphabet soup, as I call it, there's so many organizations with acronyms. I mean, my own is PAS. There's
Yeah.
just an alphabet soup. So you decide now's the time. So who sparks it off? Is it you? Is it somebody else? What happens?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's that it was right. So, well, after that kind of brief moment of unity with Fair Deal, everything fragmented again, and we could see it happening. So I always stayed in touch with Greg Mulholland, who was the Lib Dem MP who pushed the pub code through. I mean, he was great to have in Parliament for
Leeds
us.
Northwest.
Leeds Northwest. Sadly lost his seat in 2017, I think it was, wasn't it?
I think it was, yes.
But he was an absolute pub champion, and we stayed in touch. So I work with Greg. He's our campaign director at the Campaign for Pubs. And it's really a collection of the various people that we've picked up over the years, through other pub caning, like licensees, supporting licensees was a big one. So Dawn Hopkins, you'll know Dawn, great licensee in Norwich. She's vice chair, I'm chair. And we just basically got together all the kind of heavy hitting, and kind of like really savvy people that we could get our hands on at the time from the various different organizations, and put together a national executive, and we put together a campaign for pubs. And our remit, the reason that we did this is because basically there is no constituted organization out there that we feel isn't to some extent compromised by the existing system. Now that might sound harsh on certain organizations. Camera springs to mind, but when Camera's giving away at that point Weatherspoons vouchers to attract people in, that's the example of an uncomfortable link with the industry that is seen by many people as compromising their position. And also the thing about Camera is it's not an industry campaigning group, it's a consumer group. It's there for consumers, and that's its complete reason, and it's been fantastically successful on its own terms, in terms of protecting and the idea of car scale, which I totally agree with. I love car scale. That's why I love running pubs. That's the thing I enjoy the most about it, actually, is in terms of drinks, is looking after the car scale. So I'm very grateful to Camera. But there are points that we would argue in our campaigning that they wouldn't agree with, because they're not representing the industry,
the operators, the public,
the consumers. Exactly, yeah. And that is a crucial difference. So it puts us. We felt there was something needed that was an industry voice that was had totally untouched by establishment connections. So the other one that you might think of in the industry that you would think might be doing this, for example, is SEBA. But if you look at the history and reason for SEBA to exist, it's basically it was set up as a way to get beer from small producers into the tied pub system. So the direct delivery system was the reason that SEBA was founded, and that was a commercial, not for profit, but people still get paid for doing this. And it means that you can buy beer from local breweries if your pub company is SEBA accredited, or sorry, if it allows you to use the SEBA system. But what we found was that it was the single most expensive way that we could buy beer, was going through the SEBA direct delivery system. So,
and I just want to, just on that point, who delivered the beer? The small brewer.
The small brewer. The pub company never even touched it.
Your pub company didn't even touch it. So they're like a dry broker. So they said, you must call this brewer, place your order. You pay the money to the brewer. Did you pay it to them, or did you pay?
We paid the money to the pub company, and they then paid the brewer, having taken their
whatever that price was. So you didn't get to see the wholesale price per se. You were just given a price, but you didn't know what your pub company paid for it.
Well, we actually, at one point, we did actually get, and I don't know whether this was mischievous on the part of the independent brewer, but we did actually get some paperwork dropped with a SEBA delivery that included the bill to the pub company.
Right.
And it was our bill was exactly double. It was exactly double the price that they were going to charge the pub company.
Your landlord made they doubled the price, and they don't even touch the beer, they don't even brew the beer, they don't even market it, literally do nothing. And they just made double on that.
It was totally an invoicing exercise from their point of view. There was no logistics involved. They're even the breweries even paying for the petrol or fuel to get the beer to the pub. There's no cost to the brewery. Sorry, not brewery, to the pub
So
company.
the pub company, if there was a SIBA brewer supplying 100% of their beer to Tide pubs, their pub company would make as much as the brewery in terms
Yes,
of sales.
yes. Although I suppose SEBA would say at some point in there, there's a cost got to come out for the SEBA administration. So
Oh, so
somewhere there's
so SIBA itself may be having also a charge because obviously there's membership and etc. Yeah, I
yeah.
can see that. Yeah,
But
so
then the brewery pays SEBA to be a member anyway,
mm,
and then they pay. I think certainly in those days they pay for every beer they list. They pay separately for each beer,
yes.
and then it got to the point where SEBA wouldn't accept certain accreditations, and they set their own accreditation scheme up, and the brewery had to sign up for that as well. So,
Ah,
you know,
so they weren't
wait,
representative publicans either. They're
no,
another organisation. They've got national reach, but there's no, as you say, there's no. It's not appreciable to what you're doing. So operators like yourself, Dawn, you say, hey, let's have an organisation for us. I fully support that. I'm 110% behind that kind of thing,
yeah,
because I think it's important that when you speak truth to power, I think it's vital you come from a position of experience. And there's
yes.
nothing better, I think, than having men and women who are publicans representing publicans. It's
Well,
unimpeachable for me.
yeah, totally. Well, we are a mixture. We are a mixture of people that we do have people who are not publicans, but they're all devoted pub lovers, pub goers. So,
Mm,
for example, on the planning side of our campaigning, we have some people who've been members of community groups that have bought pubs and that kind of thing. So that
yeah.
they've all had some connection with not necessarily as an operator, but as an investor or as someone who cares deeply about pubs. Um, but obviously, everyone that joins sees our view of the industry and subscribes to it, whether they've been an operator or not. They can still see the damage that has been done, for example, by the Pubco model. I mean, it's not difficult to see the damage because it's on every high street up and down the land at the moment. If you see a boarded up pub somewhere, there's a very good chance that within a few years that pub has been owned by a pub company. It's either been a disposal or whatever. So it's not hard to convince people who join the campaign that we're right about the pub companies because it's self-evident that model is not working.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, we're a really healthy mix of operators. Greg's an ex-politician and a serious campaigner. He's never actually run a pub, but he deeply loves pubs. And yeah, we're a good healthy mix of people. And we've certainly we've made waves. We've managed to become we're a bit of a go-to source now for the media, and increasingly, thank God, we are actually getting some purchase with policymakers, which is where we really need to be heard.
I think, back to what I said, the pub companies will do what they do, fighting them and, having your sort of disputes with them on an individual basis has of merit, but it has very little memory.
Mm.
And that memory and that change and that real reform can only come from the executive, from Westminster, effectively, or the Scottish Parliament, because obviously we mustn't forget there's a Scottish code which is coming into force at the end of this month. So,
Yeah.
which I've had a hand in. So let's look back on this period that you've been in. So you have this tide period. There's no regulation for a while. Regulation comes in. You attempt to use it. There are hurdles thrown under your feet or in front of your legs, I should say, which are designed to trip you up. And for reasons of, expediency and actually getting something out of this, you go free of tie. You take a commercial deal, yeah, from that, and your evidence and everything, your experiences, you put all of that back to government, and you've been obviously telling your local MP, which, if I remember correctly, is Rachel Maskell.
Yeah.
Shout out to Rachel for being a pubs champion.
Yes, she deserves one. Yeah.
And she's doing a good job, because I'm sure there's a lot of York publicans that have been beating a path to her door. I think in wrapping up this period, so you then obviously continue this path that you've got on, and we first met on the campaigning path. And the campaign for pubs is open to anyone. It's a broad church, yeah? What's
Yes.
membership? Is it 50 quid a year, 25 quid a year? I don't know what.
It's £25 a year. We don't offer any incentives for anyone to join. We just say, these days that's a round. That's one round of
Is it
drinks.
around? I think it was around when you got started. I'm not sure.
If well,
London
no,
prices,
well, maybe not, but
2 pints,
in London that might get you maybe 3 pints. I don't know.
2 or 3.
Um,
Yeah,
in,
yeah.
in
I would
in
say
our
three.
pubs, it'll probably get you
Yeah,
5 pints, which is
they probably
great.
get.
But basically, yeah, it's not. It's a half per month. If you look at just trying to, it's not a lot of money,
No,
but we just if we had people signing up, a couple of thousand people would be, if we can get to that point, it would suddenly um transform things for us.
I think there's a
Um,
lot of people out there who, when a microphone is stuffed under their nose or they're put on the spot, they say, "Yeah, we love pubs."
yeah,
But that doesn't seem to actually transpose into affirmative, positive action other than we love them. Yeah, I love them. I love clouds, you know,
yes,
but I'm not a meteorologist, So I think it's fair to say we want people to, join this organization. I do, because I think your heads are in the right place. You've got an absolute brilliant pedigree, that all of you, to be doing the right things, and it's a safe, not just a safe pair of hands. You are, consummate businessmen and women to your bootstraps. So I think it's important that there's a commercial led campaign. It's not just something that's a bit fluffy. This is serious stuff, and reform for pubs and pub tenants affects all communities, because
absolutely,
we all want lovely, well turned out, vibrant pubs that have got good facilities, they're clean, they've got a good range of drinks, they're open throughout the week. We want this. That's what we want. If I travel the country, I'd like to see good regional operations, different beers, nice different things. That's what I'd
totally.
like to see, and that's not a bad thing, and that may not fit with globalization, homogenization of a chain of pubs, but that's why I always, when I'm driving around Britain, go to an independent pub as opposed to a chain or a managed group or whatever. But they have their place. Don't get me wrong; they do have their place, but from a personal point of view, I want to see that independence, and I think you guys are absolutely in a great position to do that. And if I can assist in any way, I will continue to assist, because yeah, I want to see a wonderful landscape too for pubs.
Well,
So
that's great. That's how we feel about it, Chris. And interesting, you mentioned the importance of pubs, and you also mentioned the diversity of beer that's available in the country, which is not being reflected in our pub industry at the moment, because
why is
access to
that? Well,
market.
I'm
Well,
just gonna ask
exactly.
you, why
Ac-
is that?
Access to market for small brewers. We have reached the conclusion that the campaign for pubs, it, as it's as useful for small brewers as it is for publicans and people who love pubs. Because basically, the status quo at the moment that's being controlled by these corporations only works for those corporations. Everybody else loses. Consumers lose because they don't get the choice. Um, Small brewers lose because they can't get access to their local pubs to put their beer. So, and the customers to those pubs therefore lose because they can't sample the local beers from the area that might be, the brewery might be just down the road, and it's not allowed to buy the beer. So this system works against everyone,
Mm,
publicans, customers, small brewers. That's why we exist. That's who we want to join. We want those people that are losing out, which is almost everyone. Um, and yeah, and it's because we think it's so important. It's just so important that we keep this industry going. It's important for our communities. It's important for our economy. It's important for everyone's health and well-being to actually have somewhere to congregate and share experiences. They're so important, pubs,
mm. Do you
and they're
think?
not.
I mean, there has been touted, in the press on and off for years and years and years. As far back as I can remember, loads of pub closures. It's kind of like a regular story. It comes around like the cuckoo in spring. The and there are always arguments over the numbers of closures. You spoke about an issue a little while ago where you talked about the churn of pubs, and just tell me through the churn. What's your perspective on what a churn is, and why is a pub churning? What do you mean by that?
Well, a churn is quite a well-known term in the industry, as you all know, Chris. And it's talking about tenants. It's talking about tenants going through a leased pub, so a leasehold pub. You'll get someone basically starting this process by taking the pub in the first place. Um, they'll invariably run into some kind of difficulty after a few years because they realize that the cost of doing business under that model is extremely challenging, and you've got to basically overtrade the pub to actually survive, really, in a tied lease. Um, and it's very easy for a pub, therefore, to get into a cycle of failure. So the first tenant fails, someone comes along, the pub company says, well, oh, they weren't doing it right. You've got what it takes, well, what you've got is 30 grand in your bank account, probably. But yeah, they'll tell you you've got what it takes. They'll watch you fail, and this will happen over and over again. And of course, what's happening to the pub while all that's going on is that none of these tenants have any money to invest in the pub.
Mm.
So the pub's getting more and more dilapidated. Um, Probably cosmetic, paint over job just to keep it looking respectable enough to trade. But the plumbing could be falling apart or anything.
But the services are not being attended to. The pub's taking a hammer.
No, there's no real maintenance.
It becomes unfit and probably unloved by those customers.
Yeah,
Because you're being asked to pay a premium for, food and drink in a space that is just not being looked after.
absolutely.
Yeah,
And it's
so
because those tenants have been churned through. That's the term. Is these
yeah,
you churn it through until you get to the point where basically you'd have to be mad to take the pub on because it's so dilapidated. So then it ends up in a sort of a tenancy at will situation, which is somebody basically in there to keep the doors open.
the babysitters.
And very often the pub will get marketed off books to some, and they'll try and find some developer or someone to come and take it on. Uh, Now we were lucky with the other two pubs that I run that aren't the Swan. They were both Pubco disposal sites. They'd both reached the end of their Pubco life. So Punch owned the Volunteer Arms, and Marston's owned the Slip Inn. And they both companies wanted rid of those two pubs, and they were lucky enough. The pubs were to be actually, well, we had to. In the case of the Volunteer Arms, we had to go to a planning meeting to oppose an application that had been put in by Punch Taverns themselves to turn it into two houses. So this is a pub company, right?
So the pub company couldn't make a success of it, or
Yeah.
couldn't allow any tenant operator to make a success of it. So it fails under, as you say, the model, and then they don't want it to be a pub anymore.
No. So they applied for it to be two houses. And
Can
I
you
went,
imagine? Can you imagine an industry where somebody that's called a pub company
well, yeah,
has a
exactly.
model whereby we want to turn them into housing? What kind of pub company is that? It's kind of
Absolutely. They are property companies. There's no
property
two ways
company.
about it. They're property companies
Opco.
who've bizarrely been given this incredible privilege of actually being able to operate a beer tie on their
It is an
tenants.
incredible privilege. I don't think enough is made of that. I mean, in fact, if
They're
you
not even brewers, they've got
well,
nothing to do with beer.
this dry brokerage model allows them to charge double for the beer, and not only that, there are very few countries of the world. I'm struggling to think of anywhere where beer ties operate. I mean, it literally is a privilege.
Well, it
And
is illegal, and in most countries, this kind of vertical integration
pay for
model.
play, yes, as
Yeah,
it may be called in America and other places. So yeah, you have this massive inequity, and it is very odd. I mean, you spoke about investment, and I just want to pick up on that because the two big buzzwords that are often chucked over the wall, if you like, from, I would say, the other side. I mean, I like to think I sit on the wall. I don't sit on a fence, but I do sit on the wall. And I see these words chucked over. The two big ones that are chucked over, one is support, and we spoke about that earlier, and you said there just isn't really any support, and the other one is investment and jobs. What investment and jobs did Punch or Heineken give to you or help you with?
nothing. Me personally, nothing.
I'm
No.
shocked. I'm shocked you said nothing. I'm glad I'm sitting there. So nothing for both. So the innovation is down to you. The investment is down to you. The sales and marketing is all down to you.
Yeah.
What is on the other side? Nothing. Just nothing. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think there probably are tenants that would take up, for example, offers of printed material or menus and that kind of thing. But they're going to be corporate. If they come from head office, they're going to be essentially corporate in style. And you could probably do it cheaper yourself.
So there was no benefit for their buying power that you could see. So
Oh no.
so the services that were offered on the side, there was no cheapness to it. It wasn't a big discount or a special price for you. It just felt like it was the same, if not more expensive. Yeah.
Yeah, well, a lot of the stuff, like they offer the rating service. You get your rates checks and stuff for 50 quid or whatever. Well, you can get that stuff for free.
Right.
A lot of it didn't really make sense actually.
So it's dressed up as a benefit.
Yeah,
It's sold to you as a kind of a package. But I would say this, of all the packages and benefits and things that you saw during your punch days, and I know I'm asking you to look back a few years here, were any of them in your contract? Were any of them actually part of your lease agreement? No,
No,
not at all. None.
no, no. That is a big problem, and you're right to flag that up. There is no contractual obligation for them to give tenants any of this stuff.
Mm,
They're not obliged. There is no contractual relationship in regards to the so-called countervailing benefits, or none of it's really quantifiable. It certainly doesn't add up to outweighing the incredibly excessive amount you pay them for the beer and
mm,
probably for your rent as well. No, it's not a contractual situation. It's just
mm.
they have
So it's very good sales talk.
really, yeah. Oh, there's a lot of promises made when you first take the pub on about the incredible amount of support you're going to get, and coming back to the investment thing,
Yeah.
a lot of pub companies do claim, oh yeah, we invest in our estates. Well, very often the investment is promised to an incoming tenant. This is a very big one.
Yeah.
Oh, if you take the lease, we'll invest this amount. Well, if that's not in writing, it's not worth the breath that's been used to speak it. Because you won't. So many tenants have taken pubs on that basis
You
and
can't
not had it
hold
in
you can't
writing,
hold your landlord to that.
and it's never materialized because it's not a
No.
contractual arrangement.
And
No.
some of the other investments I've obviously been aware of, and I don't know if they were offered to you. Some of them were capex work, so capital
Yeah.
expenditure spent on the building. Did you ever get offered any of that?
No, I think because the Swan's quite a tricky one to do that kind of work on, really,
Mm.
with it being listed. And I never asked for anything like that because I know that ultimately it would get loaded onto my rent. This is the way that
So
investment.
the capex investment from pub companies generally is just added to the rent.
Yeah, generally they're looking to get that investment back over the term of your lease.
Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to survive that long.
I mean, you're a guy that was very astute with financial matters. So, given the cost of it being added to your lease, is that above the bank rate? Is that above market interest rates? Would you say if you pay that back over the term of your lease? Would you say those
Uh,
capexes are expensive deals, more expensive than just getting a loan if you could get a loan?
yeah, and probably getting the work. If the pub company organises the work's going to be more expensive than it would be if you'd organised it yourself in the first place anyway.
Wow. So worst of all
But
worlds.
Yeah, well, the problem a lot of pub tenants have is because, and I had this, when I first took the pub on, 2007, the next year was the financial crash.
Mm.
It was the year of the smoking ban. It was like the worst possible time in theory to take a pub on,
Apart
and
from
we kind of,
2017.
that's 2007, so
Yeah,
we had the
yeah.
2008 crash. Um, you know, Looking back on it, we weathered that incredibly well at our place, but a lot of places really suffered, and the banks came out of the other end of that. And pubs were just regarded as being poison. They didn't want to give any money to anyone for a pub. It was regarded as being a totally
So
toxic
your
sector.
landlord becomes the last resort or the
Yeah,
lender's last
exactly.
resort. So they've got a monopoly over the financial side there because you can't go anywhere else, right?
No, exactly. That's
That's it.
right.
So yes, you say the deals are distinctly above market and don't work for you. The other kind of investment, I think, it gets a bit muddled, but it generally, to my mind, is where the pub companies strike a deal with the tenant for a new rent. Let's say you're at rent review, and then you get an enhanced discount, and they count that discount, if you've got a bigger discount, as an investment in your business.
Right.
So, so if you were
Again,
paying £120 a barrel and your buying power at rent review meant you then only pay £100 and give you a £20 discount, they count those discounts and say, well, we've invested in your pub, but
yes.
it wasn't real money, right? It's not actually, in that sense, it wasn't. It was overpriced in the first place. Yeah.
Yeah, and also I've got no idea whether in that situation whether it would be in a contract, but certainly the discounts that you get offered as an incoming tenant when you
Mm.
when you take an assignment or when you take a pub on, they're not these things aren't written in stone. Those discounts can be varied, you know.
So
Um,
even the same tenant and the same pub company can have a widely differing discount structure. Yeah.
oh, totally. Well, that was definitely the case, when I was tied to Punch. Yeah, I was on a different discount. I was on the least possible discount actually. But as far as I'm aware, I never heard of anyone who had less discount than me. And when they say discount, by the way, what they mean is that you're getting discounted from a notional price that's like the wholesale price that nobody pays in the industry. So if, for example, the going rate on the open market for a keg of beer is, so let's say a 9 gallon cask is 80 quid or whatever, the wholesale price quoted on the pub company's list will be 170. So you get a discount off that. So your
Ah,
discounted price might be 150 for something that you could get on the open market for 80 quid. That's what they mean when they say discounts.
yes.
And that's like, for the fact that we've put this stuff in front of policymakers and said, well, that's a made up price. They're giving a discount off a totally made up price. And still the penny hasn't dropped that this is a total rip-off.
You're describing a barrel price that is artificial,
Totally artificial.
effectively, and that, as you say, this discounting that goes on is muddying the waters around what is investment, what is support,
Yeah.
and how that kind of melds down to actually helping. So the words that are often, as I say, when I've sat on this wall and I've seen these words thrown about, support, investment, etc., they carry a lot more weight than they actually have. I
Yeah,
mean,
definitely.
they seem to give very, very good cover for if you actually went and looked, from your own evidence testimony right here, really telling us that actually it's not worth a bean.
Absolutely.
There is no support, there wasn't any investment, and if there was an investment, it was so expensive, you were just better off doing it yourself.
Yeah, and this comes back to the credulity of policymakers in the face of someone like the BBPA, who are like a big official sounding British Peer and Pub Association. They just take stuff on face value from these people.
Mm.
Some of the figures that are bandied around, I remember historically there were figures like a pub company would say, well, we've invested £100 million in our estate. Well, if you then break it down by the number of pubs,
Yeah.
there's been times when that's equated to about 3 or 4 thousand quid per pub or something, which
Mm.
any pub operator will tell you it won't even touch the sides. It won't even paint the outside of the pub or anything.
Well, installing a new, I don't know, fire alarm is probably
Yeah,
5 to 6 grand. So,
exactly. And
yeah.
the chances are that when they use those figures, what they really mean is, God, we've got some pubs that were really properly knackered, so we had to spend loads of money on some of them. The other ones never saw a bean, because but
Yeah, that's a narrative that I don't recall any specific stories from Punch or your time under Heineken where they've said, "Oh, we've invested in the estate," but you never saw any of this.
no,
What you describe, it never
no,
trickled down your way. Yeah,
these
where
big
did it
figures
go?
sound impressive, but
Where did it go? Yeah, mystery.
yeah.
Another mystery for the regulator to look into if they can be bothered. I mean, I think it's fair to say. I don't control their job. They obviously have their case to answer. But Paul, I mean, in wrapping up where we are today, you're continuing to operate these pubs. Are you looking to buy a fourth one, or are you going to stick with the three for now?
Oh,
Three and gin, shall we say?
I'd never say never. I've got a bit more energy again now. It got very draining part way through, and I thought that was it. I thought I couldn't do anything else. Um, but I don't know. I don't know. I do love pubs, but they're very getting hold of a good site these days before it's snapped up and redeveloped. It's getting very difficult to get hold of pubs that you can make work. So that's why we've seen an explosion of micro pubs and craft tap rooms and that
Because
kind
they
of.
have to go somewhere. There is a demand for
Well, there's
drinks.
a demand,
And it's
absolutely.
just had to
Despite,
go to
yeah,
the sides, they
yeah,
have a shop on the high street where they can shoehorn that in, or some industrial unit. I mean, neither of them are purpose built, neither of
no,
them are ideal. I mean, sure, they can capture an audience and a market, and I understand that. And there are people out there who find those places welcoming and supportive and all those things, which a pub does, which is
mm,
great. But for my money, they're not purpose built. I never find them that comfortable. And that's not to besmirch anyone that has a microbar that I visited, because I do enjoy it. But
yeah,
in terms of long-term patronage, comfort, purpose built pub is where it's at for me.
yeah, absolutely.
Why can't people get hold of them? What's
Yeah,
the
yeah. I mean, also getting hold of the capital to buy them is actually is increasingly challenging. So we've got pubs that are sat on the market and no one's got the money to actually invest in them at the moment. I think the way
and
the
yet the
economy,
demand's there. The
It's
demand.
difficult. I think the demand is there. Yeah, absolutely. But these places also need, it's not just the purchase price of the pub, it's the investment cost to get it back into
Actually, well, I want to
a
talk about
reasonable
just
state, you know.
as we're wrapping up here. Just a couple of things I want to nail with you. I'd really love to hear your view on this. So, when you were tied, when you're free of tie, yeah, did you employ more people when you went free of tie?
Oh,
Did you create new jobs?
that's an interesting one. I don't know if we did as such, but what we are is a living wage employer. You know,
Right.
we are
So
a
you
living
could
wage
pay.
foundation.
So you could
We
pay more.
we paid them more. Exactly. Yeah. I don't think there was scope to create more jobs because we haven't really changed them. Well, we got busier. Actually, we got even busier when we went free of charge. So we needed more staff. I suppose actually in that sense we did. But we're quite lean. We don't do any food. You know, we're just wet-led pubs. So we're quite lean
So
operations
the
really.
Thai operation is holding you back. You can fly. You use that word, not literally, but you fly a bit. So you go free of Thai. You're busier. You're employing more people. Are you working with more suppliers now than you used
Yes.
to do?
Oh yes, definitely. Yeah.
And a lot of these suppliers, where are they drawn from? Within 30 miles of base,
Yeah,
or
absolutely. And we make a conscious effort to support, you know, as local
Mm,
independent brewers as much as we possibly can.
mm.
We do use some kind of independent wholesale to get hold of stuff that's further afield, but we love dealing with, you know, like Brass Castle, like on my t-shirt, you know,
Brass Castle
and Phil,
Brewery? Yeah, Phil.
yeah,
Yes.
and Phil, the owner of Brass Castle, is actually our brewery coordinator at the campaign as well. So he's the one that would be liaising with other small brewers to tell them the benefits of getting involved with the campaign. Um, yeah, we love dealing with local suppliers, and without a doubt, I would say that more of the money that our customers spend in our pubs stays not just in the UK economy, actually, because it's
Yeah.
not being funneled off into
Not the
some
Cayman Islands.
multinational or yeah, exactly, but it
Yeah.
stays in the local economy, which is a
That's
really
really
virtuous
important.
circle.
I think that's such an important issue. I'm not sure enough is made of that, and apologies if you have stuck that forward to Westminster, but I think it's important to say you have created more employment, higher pay, and working with more local suppliers. That's
Yeah,
got to be a win for UK PLC.
totally. We have made this argument. You know, this government keeps banging on about the need for growth. Well, if you want growth, let these local brewers supply their local pubs
And
because
let people go free of tide, right?
yeah, let people go free of tie. Just sort this industry out, and you'll have a thriving UK brewing industry rather than a contracting one because we're losing craft brewers at the moment because they
Mm.
simply can't get access to market, and it's totally
Yeah,
unforgivable, you know?
it's not enough to fight it out on a supermarket shelf where you've got
No,
like three cans
that's just a race to the
vis
bottom.
yeah, you got three cans of visibility. I mean, you want volume sales from a microbrewery, you need to get into the pub sector. That's
Totally,
what
you know.
volume is. That's a
Well,
very important point.
we've got no qualms about driving a hard bargain with a multinational supplier. So we do sell some stuff, for example, from Carlsberg. They provide our bigger brands because we do need some bigger brands on the bar because we're actually pubs, you know, we're not
Yeah.
just a craft beer outlet. But I've got no problem driving a hard bargain with them. We don't drive a hard bargain with our local suppliers. We pay them what they need for the beer. So they're doing really well. They get the money they need to pay their staff properly. All of that is completely great for the UK economy
Well,
because it's keeping all of that
yeah.
wealth.
Well, so they can continue to be there for you,
Absolutely.
supplying your pub with what your customers want
Yeah.
year in, year out. I mean, like you say, if you drive them to the floor, then they won't be there for you. They'll
No.
disappear. That is a really interesting point. I think there was something I raised with yourself a couple of years ago now, and it was very much, I think, the theme of where things might be heading for the campaign. And campaigning at large, and for those that are listening and are interested in getting involved in this sort of thing, I kind of split the problem in the market into two camps. I said we should focus on the exploitation of men and women who are, perhaps running these businesses, not getting a reward, ending up in debt, ending up with depression, etc., and the exploitation of these assets. Because this pub was built long before you and I were born. The one,
Yeah.
the one that you start off in, the Swan. It's been in that community for what? I don't know. Is it Victorian, 150 years
It
ish?
was built in 1860. Yeah.
18. So
So
not bad on the guess there, was I? So okay. So that has been a community asset for over a century and a half, getting on
yeah.
for almost 2 centuries. I think campaigning should be able to sort of coalesce itself around those two nuggets, the exploitation of the men and women in the sector and the exploitation of these assets, these community assets that have been there. It's one of the things I never do, Paul. You know, I don't know who does this, but it's definitely not me. I never drive to somebody's town, village, you know, city and go through and go, oh, look, there's a green space. I'd like to build a house on that. I never do that. I never look at someone's community hall and go, oh, wow, that's a community hall. We should knock that down and put a block of flats on that. I never do that. And I never look at someone's pub and go, oh, is that your pub? Oh, I'd like to buy that and knock it down. But there are these people that do this. I mean, you know, I find that strange. But that's the community thing for me. That's what I
totally.
Yeah.
If I could make a recommendation for your podcast, Chris,
of course you
can. The person to speak to about that is James Watson.
James Watson.
You know James Watson?
Well, I'll let you into a secret. He's on the list.
Great, because he is so brilliant on the planning side and on the value of pubs. Yes. And we all feel it, but he's just great at articulating it.
And he saved his local 10 years ago this year, would you believe?
He did.
I mean, he did.
So
the anniversary. Yeah, I'll be speaking with James very soon.
Even though I obviously totally agree with everything you just said, I'm not going to step on James's toes because I think if he covers that, it'll be much more fun than if I do it.
Oh, that's fair enough. Well, I've definitely got one viewer for that podcast, and that's you. So we'll leave it on this really great point. It's wonderful to see you, Paul. I hope you have a great summer and the tills are full. I mean, here we are sitting 19th of June. It's boiling hot outside. I think we should go and make the most of it because we're basically almost at the longest day of the year. So, you know, I wish you well and your family and all your staff, and just keep doing what you're doing. And I hope to get up to York at some point this year, and I will endeavour to give you notice and drop in on you if that's all right.
Thank you, Chris. That would be lovely. Yes.
No problem. Thanks for coming, Paul.
Thank you.
Hello once again, this is Chris from Pubs Advisory Service. Thanks ever so much for listening to the podcast, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you want to get in touch with the show, please use WhatsApp. You can contact us on 07766 073815. That is 07766 073815. You'll also find this number in the links and on our webpage, pubs.expert/podcast. Thanks again.